Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When architect Jason Sterling began building his dream home, he didn't expect a war, but beyond the reach of suburban rules, he ignited the wrath of a powerful HOA. What followed wasn't just sabotage, it was a siege. One man, one house, and a battle against quiet tyranny. I'd been dreaming of this house for 10 years, not just daydreaming, planning, drafting, revising, running simulations in my head and on paper. My firm handled skyscrapers and luxury developments across the country, but this was personal. A modernist ranch with panoramic glass walls, nestled just beyond the invisible leash of suburban conformity. Solar-paneled roof, radiant flooring, independent water filtration, and a detached studio for the days I needed to escape my own escape. I chose the lot precisely because it was not part of any HOA, just far enough from Valley Pines Reserve to keep their beige tyranny at bay. The first 2 days of construction went smoother than I expected. The site was alive with rhythm, trucks pulling in, crews unloading steel, welders shouting over grinders. Permits were approved months in advance. The county had signed off on everything: foundation, utilities, access. We were ahead of schedule, and I thought stupidly that was a good sign. Then came the knock. I was reviewing foundation depth adjustments on my tablet when I heard footsteps crunching over gravel. Too calm for a worker. I looked up to see a tall man in a slate gray golf shirt with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a smile that reminded me of tax season. "Mr. Sterling," he asked with manufactured warmth. "That's me. Adrian Brooks. I'm with the Valley Pines Reserve Homeowners Association." I gave a half laugh. "That's unfortunate." He chuckled like we were both playing the same game. "We've received some concerns from residents. Your structure is highly visible from our community paths. They feel it disrupts the harmony of the valley." I gestured around me. "This isn't your jurisdiction, not by a single inch. You know that." He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the skeletal framing of my future home. "Technically, you're right, but style has no boundaries, Mr. Sterling. People are unsettled. I'm not interested in their feelings. And unless you're delivering cupcakes and a welcome sign, we're done here." He smiled thinner. "Of course. Just thought we'd start a conversation." I didn't bother watching him leave. 3 days later, the police arrived. 2 officers. One young, twitchy. The other older, tired. They said they got an anonymous report about unpermitted construction and hazardous activity. I handed them copies of the permits, offered bottled water, and explained everything calmly. The older cop actually apologized on the way out. "You'd be surprised how often we get calls like this from those HOA types." I wasn't surprised, but I was annoyed, because now I knew the game had begun. And Adrian Brooks. He wasn't just making conversation. By the second week, it stopped feeling like coincidence. The police came again, this time around lunchtime. Different pair. One of them wouldn't look me in the eye. The other asked to see my construction compliance file, which sounded made up. I handed them the same permit binder as last time. They thumbed through it like they were skimming a menu they didn't want to order from. "And we got another report," the younger one mumbled. "Noise, possible zoning issues." "Zoning issues? This land was zoned for residential custom build 15 years ago. Want the plats too?" They didn't. They left. Again. Then came the city. First, it was someone from the Department of Sanitation citing a complaint about unsafe waste disposal. The crew had left 2 sealed paint drums next to the main trailer, ready for pickup. Nothing illegal, nothing unusual. She took photos anyway, wrote something on a clipboard, and left without answering my questions. Next day, fire safety. A heavy-set man in a county truck waddled onto the site with an expression that suggested my future house personally offended him. "You know you've got a portable generator running within 20 feet of a flammable structure. It's a steel storage container. Still counts." "No, it doesn't. And there's a fire extinguisher bolted 5 feet away." He grunted, took a picture, and mumbled something about reporting it upstream. Word travels fast on a construction site. By the end of the week, 2 crew members told me they were getting nervous. One asked if the project was cursed. Another just didn't show up the next day. When I called, he texted back, "Sorry, man, I need to stay on good terms with the city. I can't afford the heat." The worst part was how normal it all looked. No threats, no direct orders to stop, just a parade of clipboards, uniforms, and polite suspicion. Death by paperwork. On Friday, a flatbed carrying structural steel turned around before even unloading. The driver said he got a courtesy call, warning him that there might be activity on the site that weekend and suggested rescheduling. He didn't say who called. I didn't ask. I already knew. Every time I left the trailer, I felt like I was being watched. One afternoon, I caught a woman, mid-40s, expensive sunglasses, the kind of smile you only see at neighborhood HOA boards, standing across the road and filming with her phone. When I waved, she turned and walked away like she was late for yoga. Then, as if on cue, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just a folded letter inside that read, "You are not welcome here. Your house doesn't belong here. Turn back before you waste what's left." I stared at it for a long time, not because I was scared, but because it was so laughably melodramatic, like some villain in a bad TV drama. Except this wasn't fiction. This was suburban warfare, and someone had decided I was the enemy. I brought the note inside, scanned it into my records, and put it in a fireproof folder. They wanted to test how much pressure I could take. Good. I'd been under worse. But now it was official. This wasn't resistance. This was a campaign. I showed up Monday morning to find my generator gutted. The cord was sliced clean like it was done with a brand new utility knife. It hadn't sparked or shorted. Someone had cut it deliberately. The lock on the cage was still there, untouched, no forced entry, just surgical sabotage. The irony? It was so quiet I could hear the wind rolling off the ridge behind the site, which I'd come to think of as the HOA's perch. That elevated path had a direct line of sight to the whole operation. Lately, it felt less like a hiking trail and more like a sniper's nest for passive-aggressive suburbanites. I walked the perimeter, then I saw it. A folded piece of paper zip-tied to one of the steel rebars near the foundation, written in block letters with a thick marker. "Some dreams should be let go." That was new. The last note was vague. This one, it had teeth. I checked the cameras, or rather, I tried. The feed was corrupted from the night before. Static, scrambled frames, one brief flash of movement, but nothing usable. I filed it as a lesson. Redundancy wasn't optional anymore. That afternoon, a flatbed finally arrived with concrete mix. I was out front checking the gate sensors when one of the crew yelled my name. I ran back, half expecting another failure of logistics. Instead, I saw the front left tire of the delivery truck hissing like a wounded animal. 2 nails driven in at an angle so the tire wouldn't pop right away. Delayed sabotage. Smart. Cruel. The driver didn't say much, but the way he looked at me said everything. He knew this wasn't just bad luck, and he wouldn't be back. I called the concrete company. The dispatcher sighed before I even finished my sentence. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, there's chatter about your site. No one wants to get involved in drama with Valley Pines. We'll refund you for today's load, but we won't be dispatching another truck without additional insurance clearance." I hung up and sat on the metal steps of the trailer, staring at my phone like it might magically offer a solution. I had all the permits, all the legal footing, and somehow they were still winning. Not in court, in whispers, in shadows, in inconvenience. Later that evening, I noticed movement outside the fence. Someone was standing near the corner of the ridge path again, holding a phone, slowly panning it across the site. This time it was a man, bald, heavy-set, wearing a Valley Pines windbreaker. I walked toward the fence line. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just kept filming like it was his right. "You need something?" I called out. He didn't answer, just walked away. That night, I dug through the complaints filed against me with the city. A few names repeated themselves. One stood out: Richard McConnell, resident, frequent complainant, and, according to public HOA documents, husband of Karen McConnell, secretary of the board. I was starting to see the pattern, and then it hit me. This wasn't just organized. It was familial. These people weren't acting as neighbors. They were acting as a cartel. I stopped sleeping through the night, not from fear, just logistics. Every knock, every shifting shadow on the monitor, every dip in voltage from the temp lighting system had me checking feeds or walking the perimeter. I was living in a state of slow-burn siege. And like any siege, it needed a countermeasure. First, I doubled my surveillance. I swapped out the cheap motion-activated cams for proper outdoor-rated IP systems, weatherproof, night vision, full 4K, set to dump footage to 3 separate encrypted drives. I posted signs about recording, not because I thought it would deter anyone, but because I wanted them to know. Eyes were watching now. Mine. Then I did something that made me feel like I was prepping for a goddamn raid instead of building a house. I hired security, not the mall cop kind either. 2 men, both ex-military, 1 Marine Recon, 1 Army MP. I found them through a guy I'd gone to grad school with, who now ran a risk management firm in Vegas. We signed contracts by the end of the week. They'd do rotating 12-hour shifts in a pair of trailers I parked along the northern fence line, right where the HOA's ridge trail offered a clean vantage point. The neighbors noticed immediately. On their next walk, a couple from Valley Pines slowed to a crawl near the new setup. The woman pointed at the security camera above the gate like she'd spotted a mountain lion. Later, someone called the local zoning board to report armed men camping near residential properties. Of course, my guys were licensed, unarmed unless needed, and staying on private property with legal consent. Didn't matter. The HOA was spiraling. They weren't used to resistance. Within days, I was being accused, on a neighborhood Facebook group I didn't even belong to, of militia posturing, intimidating residents with mercenaries, and threatening children's mental well-being. I only found out because a friend's wife, who still lived 2 streets inside Valley Pines, sent me screenshots with a note that read, "You're officially the villain in the mommy blogs now. Congrats." But then things got quiet, too quiet. No new complaints, no strange cars, no concerned citizens filming through the trees. My crews came back cautiously at first, then in full numbers. Cement was poured, steel set. We passed the next inspection without incident. I didn't relax. Instead, I adjusted the camera's motion settings to more sensitive thresholds. I updated the logs nightly. I made sure my guards documented every person or vehicle that passed within 20 yards of the perimeter. A week in, we were almost bored. Until 3:42 a.m. on a Thursday. The alert came through my phone with a high-pitched chime. I tapped the feed open and saw the north camera flash to life. 3 figures, all dressed in black, hooded, moving low along the fence. One carried a backpack. Another had a crowbar. The third, wire cutters. I threw on jeans and sprinted barefoot into the cold night. By the time I reached the south trailer, my guys had already intercepted them. One intruder was pinned face down in the dirt, hand zip-tied behind his back. Another was bleeding slightly from a gash on his forearm. He tried to climb the stack of cinder blocks and slipped. The third stood frozen under the floodlight, surrounded. They weren't kids. They weren't strangers. One of them was Adrian Brooks. Another was Richard McConnell, Karen's husband. And the third, he was the same bald man I'd seen filming the site from the ridge 2 weeks earlier. His name would come later, but I already recognized the face. One of the HOA's witnesses from a previous anonymous complaint about hazardous materials. I told the guards to start recording. We got it all. The masks, the bolt cutters, the whispered plan to cut the copper spools and dump grit in the concrete mix. One of them muttered something about shorting the junction box before the solar rig goes live. Strategic damage. Calculated. I didn't yell. I didn't hit anyone. I just stood there in the wash of white floodlight, arms crossed, listening to them beg. Then I called the cops. This time, I wasn't the suspect. The cops arrived faster than I expected. Maybe because I told dispatch I had 3 intruders zip-tied on private property with footage to back it all up. Maybe because one of the names I dropped, Adrian Brooks, carried weight at the local precinct. Not good weight. Either way, I stood barefoot on the gravel drive, arms crossed, as 2 patrol cars rolled up, followed by a county cruiser with a deputy supervisor. The moment they stepped out and saw the trio on the ground, 2 sitting silently, 1 pacing like a caged animal, they knew this wasn't just a drunk joyride gone wrong. I handed over the footage. My guards backed up everything, timestamps, encounter logs, the attempted sabotage. One of them, Darren, even recorded the audio where McConnell hissed, "Just cut the main. Kill the whole system. No one works tomorrow." It wasn't even 2 minutes into playback before the deputy's face turned into a slab of granite. "Jesus," he muttered. They weren't just trespassing. They came ready to cause serious damage. Adrian, to his credit, tried to shift gears. "It was a misunderstanding," he said, voice raspy from the dust. "We thought someone was hurt on the property. You scaled a locked fence and brought bolt cutters." The deputy interrupted. "Come on, man." Karen's husband tried the passive-aggressive route. "You realize this looks bad for everyone. Maybe we can de-escalate." That earned him a laugh. "Not from me." From one of the younger cops who muttered under his breath, "Should have thought of that before going mission. Impossible on a construction site." The third guy, bald, silent, didn't say a word, just stared at the concrete mixer they'd planned to tamper with, like it might suddenly explain how they got caught. I gave my full statement, handed over drive copies, photos of the tools they dropped, close-ups of the copper wiring they tried to cut. Then I pointed at the note one of them had stupidly left in the trash pile near the trailer, same handwriting as the last warning. Your house ends before it begins. The deputy took one look and bagged it. That's not even poetic, he muttered. Just dumb. They cuffed the three one by one. No struggle, no shouting. Just that kind of HOA arrogance finally beginning to curdle into panic. Adrian's smirk was gone. McConnell looked like someone had canceled his golf membership. Karen's husband, once so smug, now looked small. As the cruisers pulled away, red and blue lights painting the unfinished frames of my home in progress, I let myself exhale. Not from relief, just from release. The silence after you slam a door shut on something rotten. It didn't feel like victory, not yet, but it felt like a crack in the wall, like the performance was over and masks were off. Still, I wasn't celebrating, because this was just the part where you document the crime. The real work, court, exposure, the rot beneath the surface, that was still ahead. And something told me the HOA wasn't done bleeding. I spent the next 48 hours knee-deep in evidence, talking to more law enforcement officers than I had in the last 10 years combined. For once, they were all listening, not rolling their eyes, not shrugging at anonymous complaints. No, now they took notes. I handed them everything. Hard drives, footage, backups, even the old motion logs I hadn't thought mattered. My security guys gave sworn statements. We documented the damage to the copper spools, the vandalized cement mix, and the fence latch one of them had jimmied with a screwdriver. The DA's office got involved within 3 days. Apparently, conspiracy to commit sabotage on private construction is the kind of phrase that still wakes up bored prosecutors. The real breakthrough came from a small box labeled City Compliance. It held every letter, every inspection notice, every time a clipboard-wielding stranger showed up claiming someone had concerns. I hadn't just kept them. I'd scanned, dated, logged each visit. One name popped up more than any other: Derek Hastings, City Inspector, Department of Architectural Oversight. At first glance, just a guy doing his rounds. But when an officer asked if I had any photos of inspectors, I remembered a snapshot my contractor took months ago, someone lurking near the east edge, behind the gravel piles. That was Hastings. Same face. Same time, his name appeared on 2 separate violation tags. The detective flagged it immediately. You know this guy's related to Karen McConnell? I blinked. What? Brother. Confirmed it through DMV records, shared last address 10 years ago. She's listed as next of kin on his city employee file. That changed everything. Now it wasn't just local HOA lunatics making fake calls. It was a coordinated effort, pulling strings from inside city departments. They subpoenaed Hastings' work emails and pulled his city-issued phone. The audit found direct communication between him and both Adrian Brooks and Karen, requests for site pressure, mentions of deniability, and one glorious gem where Adrian actually wrote, "If we keep the heat up, he'll fold or move." Turns out, A wasn't paranoid. The DA expanded the case. Hastings was suspended. His personal devices showed he'd approved 4 inspections that had never occurred, just signed off, let complaints pile on. The city attorney nearly choked when that came to light. Their official statement called it a deeply inappropriate personal entanglement compromising public trust, which is bureaucrats for we're about to get sued. Meanwhile, Karen disappeared. Not literally. She just stopped walking her Pomeranian past my fence at 7:13 a.m. every morning like clockwork. Her Facebook went private. Adrian posted bail just shy of $15,000 and gave a press statement through a lawyer claiming it was all a misunderstanding and a misguided act of community concern. The story hit local news within the week. Architect's dream project sabotaged by HOA in suburban scandal. I wish I could say I was flattered, but mostly I felt tired. Vindicated, but tired. The final touch? I got a call from one of the smaller concrete contractors I'd worked with in the past. "Hey," he said, "we heard the HOA got caught. If you're still building, we'd be honored to help finish it right." That call meant more than the news coverage. It meant the Whisper Network was turning. The fear that had kept everyone in line, it was cracking. And now, with criminal charges in motion and evidence stacked like plywood in a storm, I could finally shift my attention to where it really mattered, breaking their system completely. The collapse didn't come with explosions or headlines. It came with spreadsheets. After the arrests, after Hastings was indicted, after the city scrambled to explain how one of their own had moonlighted as a neighborhood enforcer, Valley Pines Reserve started to hemorrhage from the inside. It began with the audit, triggered by the DA's office and pushed through by a petition from 74 residents, some of whom had been targeted by the HOA for everything from unauthorized patio lighting to excessive wind chimes. The county sent in an independent forensics accountant to comb through the HOA's books. They were expecting a mess. They found a black hole. Over $140,000 in unapproved expenditures, payments to shell vendors for consulting, invoices for emergency architectural assessments that went directly to a company registered under Adrian Brooks' cousin, stipends for safety surveillance teams, which turned out to be nothing more than petty reimbursements for McConnell and his HOA buddy driving around at night filming homes they didn't like. Worse, they'd used HOA funds to pay for at least 6 of the surprise inspections at my site, listing them as external compliance reviews. That's right, they used residents' dues to sabotage a property outside their jurisdiction. The report hit like a bomb. By the end of the week, Valley Pines held an emergency town hall. For once, it wasn't at their usual country club. This time, it was in the cafeteria of the local middle school. No champagne, no printed name tags, just red faces and folding chairs. I didn't attend, but I got the recordings. It was chaos. Homeowners demanding refunds, people screaming about misused funds, board members resigning on the spot. Someone in the back stood up and yelled, "You charged me $600 for a non-compliant driveway light while you paid your friends to spy on people." By the time the dust settled, 4 out of 5 board members had resigned. Adrian, already facing trial, was removed by emergency vote. Karen, absent entirely, was officially stripped of her title as HOA secretary. Then came the kill shot. The HOA's insurance provider dropped them. Too much liability, too much exposure. And with lawsuits pending, they were a toxic asset. Without coverage, they couldn't operate, couldn't protect the board, couldn't legally enforce anything. Their entire infrastructure became a rusted skeleton overnight. It got worse. Turns out, Valley Pines had a general maintenance reserve fund meant to cover common grounds, parks, walking paths, retention walls. But they'd drained most of it to bankroll their personal war against me. And when residents filed to recoup dues or claim damages, the HOA defaulted. Bankruptcy was filed within the month. That's when the city stepped in. Under a rarely used municipal clause, when an HOA dissolves and can't maintain shared land, those properties revert to local government oversight. The city absorbed the parks, the tennis court, even the clubhouse, except now they weren't exclusive anymore. They were public assets. The irony? The very spaces Valley Pines used to gatekeep were suddenly open to everyone, including me. The next week, a city crew came out to remove the old private HOA residents-only signs. I happened to be walking past the trail entrance when they unscrewed the last one. One of the workers glanced at me and said, "You're that guy, right?" The architect. "Guilty." He laughed. "Hell of a blueprint you drew up, man." I didn't reply. I just smiled and kept walking, right down that formerly private trail, surrounded by silence that for the first time didn't feel threatening. Just peaceful. The courthouse smelled like mildew and disappointment. Old building, beige walls, flickering lights in the hallway. Nothing grand, nothing cinematic. But I'd be lying if I said my pulse didn't tick a little harder when I walked through those doors and saw the defendant's table full. Adrian Brooks sat stone-faced in a navy suit a size too small for his ego. Richard McConnell looked sunburnt and irritated, like someone had ruined his tea time. The third man, quiet, bald, HOA's anonymous witness, kept his eyes glued to the floor. I didn't know if it was shame or strategy. Maybe both. Their lawyers tried for theater. They painted it as a miscommunication, said their clients were acting out of deep concern for community safety, that they had no malicious intent. Adrian's attorney even used the phrase neighborhood stewardship. Our side responded with a USB stick and a printed transcript of them planning to sabotage a solar junction box. The courtroom wasn't big, maybe 30 seats for the public. Still, the gallery filled up. Local press, a few Valley Pines residents I recognized, even a city council rep. The buzz was palpable. This wasn't just petty neighbor drama anymore. This was precedent. The prosecution opened clean and sharp. They listed the charges: criminal trespass, conspiracy to commit property damage, misuse of community funds, and obstruction. Then they played the surveillance footage. No music, no slow-mo. Just raw, well-lit video of 3 grown adults crawling under fences and whispering about killing my project at the root. One juror actually gasped when Adrian said, "Short it and the panels go dead. He'll lose weeks." Then came the financials. They brought in the forensic auditor who walked the court through the trail of HOA funds, payments to Derek Hastings, the shell vendors, false inspections, emails, screenshots. Even HOA meeting minutes where Adrian had signed off on strategic community enforcement measures, a phrase so Orwellian I almost laughed out loud. The defense sputtered, claimed the audit was incomplete, that Hastings acted independently, but the cross-examination tore that apart. Emails showed Karen McConnell requesting Hastings by name, Hastings responding with timestamps for when he'd swing by to stir up the dust. Karen, by the way, never showed. Legally, she wasn't on trial yet, but her absence screamed guilt. The day Adrian took the stand, things got truly surreal. He tried charm, smiled, called me Jason, emphasized how they were just trying to protect neighborhood standards. The prosecutor asked him what legal authority Valley Pines HOA had over property outside its boundaries. His smile faltered. "I believed we had moral authority, that we were acting in the Valley's interest." "Moral authority gave you bolt cutters?" Adrian blinked. "I didn't personally use them." "But you brought them, directed others to use them." "I was under stress." "From what? An ugly house?" His lawyer objected. The judge sustained, but the point landed. You could feel it in the room. This wasn't community protection. It was territorial tantrum dressed up in khakis and bylaws. On the last day of testimony, a woman stood up in the back of the gallery, late 50s HOA badge still clipped to her purse. Her voice cracked as she said, "I voted for Adrian. I trusted him. This is not what we stood for." Silence followed. Not even the judge interrupted. The jury got the case that afternoon, deliberated for less than 4 hours. The courtroom was still when the jury came back. Not quiet, still. No coughing, no shuffling papers, no nervous whispers. Just that low-grade tension you feel before the first crack of a thunderstorm. I didn't stand. I sat back with my arms crossed, watching Adrian chew the inside of his cheek like it owed him something. Richard McConnell stared straight ahead, probably imagining a world where this was still just a zoning dispute. The third guy, the witness, looked like he already knew how this ended and had made peace with it, somewhere between processing and arraignment. The forewoman, mid-40s, pink blazer, sharp voice, read the verdict. On count 1, criminal trespass, guilty. On count 2, conspiracy to commit property damage, guilty. On count 3, fraudulent misuse of community funds, guilty. On count 4, obstruction of municipal procedures, guilty. 4 times. 4 blows. No outbursts. No sobs. Adrian didn't flinch. He just stared at the desk, eyes glossy, not blinking. I don't think he fully absorbed it. Narcissists rarely process consequences until they're wearing them. Sentencing came a week later. Prosecutors argued for exemplary punishment, citing the premeditated nature of the acts, the abuse of public trust, and the chilling precedent it would set if allowed to go soft. The defense begged for leniency, framing the whole thing as a lapse in judgment fueled by community anxiety. I almost laughed when Adrian's lawyer described him as a man driven by aesthetics and civic duty. The judge thankfully wasn't buying it. Her delivery was measured, almost surgical. To interfere with someone's legal right to build on their property is not only a violation of law, it is a violation of principle. You acted not out of duty, but out of vanity and control. You weaponized a system built on trust, and for that, you will serve time. 18 months for Adrian Brooks, 12 months for Richard McConnell, 6 months for the third accomplice, reduced for cooperation. And the kicker. The court approved my civil suit for damages. Between the HOA's remaining insurance and personal liability claims against the individuals involved, I was awarded $250,000 in total compensation. The judge even authorized additional legal costs if the defense attempted to stall payment. The day after sentencing, I walked the perimeter of my property alone. It was quiet. Not paranoid quiet, earned quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't feel like it's holding its breath, but exhaling. I passed the front gate where the old protest signs had once been staked, past the trail where neighbors used to hover and film me like I was an invasive species, past the spot where I first found the note telling me to let the dream go. And I laughed, because here it was, not just the dream, but the proof. That when you push back hard enough, with law, with facts, with steel nerves and backup drives, you can break the mold. You can fight the HOA hydra and walk away whole. Well, mostly. McConnell's lawyer offered to settle early. He didn't want his retirement assets frozen. Karen, still not charged but under city review for falsifying HOA records, had the gall to send a letter asking for amicable resolution. I sent it back. Unopened. Let them live in the ruins they built. Me? I had better things to do, like finish building my damn house. 6 months later, the house was finished. The panels caught the sun just right in the mornings. The glass walls framed the mountains like living art. Inside, everything hummed with purpose. Clean lines, quiet systems, zero wasted space. It wasn't just a house. It was a goddamn manifesto. Concrete, steel, and voltage all wired into one statement. I built this. You tried to stop me. You failed. The studio in back had become my favorite place. It smelled of cedar and fresh paint. No signal interference. No HOA letters slipped under the door. Just plans and pencils and silence. People asked me if I'd ever move in. I already had. But what surprised me most, after the dust, after the trials, after watching Adrian Brooks get let out of a courtroom like a finance bro in freefall, was what happened to Valley Pines. The city moved fast once the HOA formally collapsed. They seized the former clubhouse, stripped out the wine fridge and surveillance screens, and turned it into a public resource center, not a rec room, not a tennis court. A place where people could go to resolve real disputes, with actual mediators, not retired dentists on power trips. Even better, they converted the old HOA meeting hall into a neighborhood archive and library. Inside, under a glass case near the entry, was a section titled Suburban Overreach Case Studies. And front and center, Sterling v. Valley Pines Reserve HOA documented timeline, case summary, video stills from the night of the break-in. A printed quote from the judge's verdict about the right to property unmolested by false authority. They asked if I wanted to give a recorded statement. I declined. My house said enough. I did, however, allow one final inscription on the outer concrete wall near the front gate. A clean, recessed engraving, 2 lines only. Build, defend, record. Visitors see it before they see anything else. Delivery guys sometimes ask about it. One even fist-bumped me after recognizing the name from the news. Not everyone stayed mad. A few former Valley Pines residents stopped by over the months. No pitchforks, just quiet apologies or awkward compliments. One elderly man who'd once filed a complaint about my generator disrupting wildlife patterns brought me a bottle of scotch and said, "You scared the hell out of them. Most of us just didn't think it was possible." I thanked him. Then got back to my work. The biggest surprise came from City Council. They invited me to a town meeting, not to be punished, but to speak. Topic: reforming homeowner oversight in unincorporated zones. My speech was short. I designed a house, I said. Not a fight. But when the fight came, I documented everything. That's the part I'd change the least. They gave me a plaque. I used it as a doorstop for the studio. A few months later, I caught wind that my story was going to air on a national TV segment called Neighborhood Hell. The episode title? When the HOA Went to War with the Architect and Lost Everything. I watched it with a glass of wine and my feet on the concrete hearth I'd poured myself. The producers did a decent job. Bit dramatic with the background music, but the footage didn't lie. Watching Adrian's mugshot pan across the screen, then cutting to shots of my house glowing in twilight. Well, let's just say I didn't mind the ending. Not because I got revenge. Because I got justice. Because I got to finish.